Most people avoid coming back to the place that broke them. But Clara West drove her battered old pickup right down Main Street, past the faded Dry Creek Diner and the rusted sign for Hendrick's Livestock. The late afternoon sun caught in her chestnut hair as she passed, and she saw the looks, some curious, some cold, a few openly hostile. It had been 13 years since she'd left this town, and not a day had gone by without someone here whispering about the daughter of William Bill Hendricks, the man who'd gambled away half his fortune and disappeared into scandal. Clara's jaw tightened, but she didn't flinch. She'd survived worse. She parked at the edge of the auction yard, dust billowing around the truck, and killed the engine. All around her, people were gathering, ranchers, townsfolk, even kids hanging off the fences, their faces streaked with summer sweat. Clara took a slow breath, feeling the weight of every stare, and stepped out. The air was tense, sharp with anticipation and the tang of old resentment. Clara could feel it settling over her skin like grit. In the middle of it all stood her father, Bill, broad and grizzled, looking every bit the man she remembered, quick with a temper, slow with an apology. Time had carved deeper lines into his face, but nothing softened the steel in his eyes. He didn't look at her, not yet. He was focused on the spectacle unfolding in the center of the pen. There he was, the reason for all this noise. Firestorm. The stallion was a living contradiction, a scarred, powerful chestnut with a wild, restless energy that seemed to pulse from every muscle. Firestorm's mane was tangled, his flanks marked by old wounds that told their own story of rage and survival. No one in Dry Creek dared to claim him. Word was, Firestorm had thrown every rider, broken every fence, and bitten any hand that tried to gentle him. Today, he was to be auctioned off, the final problem in a long string of Hendrick's family messes. Clara wondered, for a bitter moment, if her father had chosen this day just to humiliate her further, one last show for the town. Bill's voice cut through the noise. "This is your last chance. Any takers for the mighty Firestorm? Dangerous, untamable, but worth every penny to the man who can ride him." He grinned, and the crowd laughed, but there was a nervousness in their eyes. Even the seasoned cowboys stayed well back from the rails. Clara watched Firestorm's ears flick, his eyes wide and wary. Something in her chest twisted. Recognition, maybe, or a strange kind of kinship. She knew what it was to be cornered, to be judged by scars that weren't your fault. An uneasy hush fell as Bill made one more pass around the pen, whip in hand. But Firestorm only lashed his tail and backed away, nostrils flaring. Bill cursed under his breath. That was when Clara stepped forward. The crowd shifted, murmured. She heard her name in whispers, Clara West, like a warning, or maybe a challenge. She didn't hesitate. She climbed the fence, boots scraping metal, and dropped into the dust with nothing but her steady gaze and a battered pair of gloves. All eyes swung to her. Her heart thudded, but she kept her chin up, moving with the quiet confidence she'd learned from her mother, not her father. Bill's face hardened. "What do you think you're doing?" Clara didn't answer him. Instead, she faced the stallion, every movement slow and deliberate. Firestorm pawed the ground, watching her with wild, distrustful eyes. "I'm not here to break you," Clara said, voice calm, just loud enough for the nearest onlookers to hear. "I know what it's like to be trapped by someone else's mistakes." A low, skeptical laugh rippled through the crowd. Someone muttered, "She'll get herself killed." But Clara pressed on. Step by careful step, she drew closer, her palms open, her eyes never leaving Firestorm's. The stallion snorted and reared, hooves slicing the air just feet from her head, dust exploding around them. Clara held her ground, refusing to run, her breath trembling just a little. Time seemed to stretch. Every second hung heavy as sweat beaded on her brow. She spoke again, softer now. "It's okay, boy. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm tired of fighting too." For one breathless moment, the entire town waited. Bill looked like he might leap the fence himself. A couple of kids gasped. Even the auctioneer fell silent. Then, impossibly, Firestorm's wildness flickered. He hesitated, muscles quivering, and Clara saw a flash of uncertainty in his gaze. She reached out, slow as sunrise. Firestorm let out a great, shuddering breath. He lowered his massive head, and for the first time, he allowed someone to touch him. Clara's fingers slid gently along his muzzle, her voice a promise in the dust. Gasps and shouts rang out, disbelief, awe, maybe even hope. Bill's face twisted with something like anger, or maybe fear. But Clara didn't look back. In that instant, it was just her and Firestorm, two wounded creatures daring to trust for the first time. She smiled, and Dry Creek would never forget what happened next. The corral was silent except for the heavy, uncertain breathing of the crowd and the pounding of Clara's heart in her chest. She stood face to face with Firestorm, her hand barely trembling against the velvet of his nose. For a split second, there was peace, a fragile, suspended truce between the woman and the wild stallion. Then Firestorm jerked his head back, nearly wrenching her arm from its socket. The crowd recoiled, and a few men hollered, "Get out of there! He's not safe!" Clara ignored them, her focus trained solely on the horse. The connection had been real. She'd felt it in the way his eyes had softened, just for a moment. But now the stallion's muscles bunched and trembled, fear and pain rippling beneath his battered hide. She stepped back, giving him room, refusing to react with the same fear the townsfolk wanted from her. Bill barked, "That's enough! You've made your point, Clara! Get out before someone gets hurt!" He swung a length of rope threateningly, ready to intervene. Clara stood her ground. A hush fell again. Even the wind seemed to pause as she took off her gloves, letting them drop in the dust. "You can't force this, Dad," she called out, her voice steady but brittle around the edges. "He's not a machine. He's scared, and so is everyone else." Bill muttered something under his breath, but he didn't move. Neither did anyone else. Clara slowly approached Firestorm once more, her hands open, her voice soft and steady. "I know you're angry. I know what it's like to be pushed and pushed until you want to fight back. But I'm not here to hurt you." The stallion snorted, tossing his head, his breath steaming in the cooling air. She kept talking, letting her words flow, not just for Firestorm, but for herself, for anyone in the crowd who'd ever felt like they didn't belong. "They all think you're dangerous because you won't let anyone near you. But I see something else. A fighter, not a monster." She edged closer, ignoring the pounding of her heart. Firestorm reared suddenly, hooves flashing dangerously close. The crowd screamed. Clara didn't flinch. Instead, she reached for the memory of her mother's gentle hand, of warm summer evenings in the old barn, of lullabies sung to restless foals. "Easy," she whispered. "It's just you and me. No more cages, no more anger." Her words seemed to hang in the air, wrapping the two of them in a fragile spell. Firestorm came down hard, sending a shockwave through the dust. His eyes rolled, whites flashing, and he snorted, testing her resolve. Clara took another small step. She began to hum, softly, uncertainly, a tune from childhood that seemed to calm the air between them. The crowd had gone utterly silent now. Bill's face was white, his hands gripping the rope so tightly his knuckles blanched. Clara kept singing, the melody trembling but true. Firestorm's ears flicked toward her, uncertain but attentive. Suddenly, Firestorm lunged. Clara stumbled back, instinctively raising her arm. The stallion circled her, nostrils flaring, sides heaving. He was close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. Clara stood absolutely still, refusing to show fear. She thought about her own scars, the secrets she'd carried since the night her father left, the ache of betrayal, the loneliness that never quite faded. With trembling hands, she spoke again. "I know you're hurting, but you don't have to fight anymore. Not with me." Something shifted in Firestorm. He lowered his head again, uncertainty flickering in his wild eyes. Clara took a risk. She reached for the halter hanging from a post, then slowly, gently, offered it for him to sniff. He hesitated, lips curling back as if to bite, but instead he just breathed her in, trembling. She moved as if time had slowed, slipping the halter up over his ears and buckling it beneath his chin. For a moment, he froze. Then, as if recognizing the trust being offered, he stilled. The crowd erupted, gasps, shouts, even a cheer or two. Bill swore, shoving his way through the onlookers, but he was too late. Clara had done the impossible. She stroked Firestorm's neck, feeling his breath even out, his panic subsiding under her touch. The auctioneer, who'd all but given up, boomed, "Ladies and gentlemen, by God, she's done it! She's tamed the wild Firestorm!" Bill shoved open the corral gate, striding in with a thunderous look. "This isn't over. He's dangerous, Clara. You think you can save everyone, but you're just setting yourself up to get hurt." Clara met her father's glare with calm resolve. Maybe. Or maybe it's time someone showed him there's more to life than pain and fear. She turned to the crowd, voice ringing with newfound authority. "He's not for sale anymore. I'll take responsibility for him." People murmured, some skeptical, some awed, some simply grateful they weren't the ones standing in the dust with the stallion. Bill tried to argue, but the sheriff, a quiet, watchful man named Nolan, stepped forward. "She did what no one else could, Bill. The horse is hers. Let her be." Clara led Firestorm from the pen, the town watching in stunned silence. She could feel the weight of their eyes, the hope and doubt and envy tangled together like barbed wire. She didn't care. She was shaking, inside and out, but she held her head high as she guided Firestorm away from the scene of her own small miracle. As she passed her father, their eyes met, his, burning with old anger and new uncertainty, hers filled with sorrow and something like forgiveness. Neither spoke. When she reached the edge of the yard, a little girl, dirt-smudged and gap-toothed, slipped through the crowd to tug Clara's sleeve. "Are you scared?" the child asked, eyes wide. Clara crouched to her level, a tired smile on her lips. "I'm always a little scared. But sometimes you have to do the scary thing anyway." She took Firestorm's halter in her hands and walked toward the setting sun, feeling, for the first time in years, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. And behind her, in the hush of a town forever changed, the legend of Clara and Firestorm was just beginning. When the last of the crowd had melted away and dusk settled soft and golden over Dry Creek, Clara guided Firestorm along a winding, weed-choked path toward the far end of the ranch. The old stables, once her mother's pride and joy, waited at the edge of a stand of cottonwoods, their peeling paint and sagging beams a testament to years of neglect. Each step closer, Clara felt memories uncoil inside her, bittersweet and raw. Firestorm walked at her side, tense but following, each hoof-fall heavy with doubt. Clara spoke to him in a quiet, steady rhythm, words barely more than a breath. "Almost there, big guy. This was home once. Maybe it could be again." The stable door groaned on its hinges, and Clara paused, letting Firestorm take in the musty, familiar scent of hay and earth. He hesitated, nostrils flaring, but didn't shy away. "See? No one here but us," she murmured. "No shouting, no ropes, just quiet." Inside, the stables were dust-choked and cluttered, shafts of sunlight filtering through warped boards. Spiderwebs clung to the rafters. A few old tack boxes stood where her mother had left them. Labels faded, but the contents still intact. Soft brushes, bottles of liniment, a dented tin of peppermints Clara remembered sneaking as a child. She smiled despite herself. Gently, she led Firestorm into the largest stall, unbuckled his halter, and stood back. He circled, head low, muscles coiled and wary. Clara leaned on the stall door and waited, her patience a silent invitation. At last, Firestorm stilled, just enough to accept the small offering of space and safety. That's when the familiar click of boots on wood echoed down the aisle. Maybelle Turner appeared, as if conjured by memory. A sturdy, silver-haired woman in patched jeans and a flannel shirt, hands on her hips and eyes sharp with concern. "You always did pick the stubborn ones, Clara," she drawled, but there was pride beneath her words. "Lord above, that's really him." Clara laughed quietly. "He's a handful, but I think he wants to try." She swallowed, emotion tightening her throat. "Thanks for coming, Maybelle. I don't know where to start." Maybelle wasted no time. She fetched clean water from the pump, grabbed a brush, and began instructing Clara in the old, familiar rituals. How to check a horse's hooves for stones, how to rub liniment into aching legs, how to soothe scars with honey and patience. The work was slow, gentle, rhythmic, and as the sky deepened to purple, something inside Clara loosened for the first time in years. Firestorm resisted at first. He flinched from the brush, tossed his head at the smell of ointment. Clara spoke softly, letting him sniff her hands before she touched him. Each gentle stroke was a conversation, each quiet pause a reassurance. "I'm not here to hurt you." Maybelle watched, nodding approval. "You got your mama's touch, you know that?" she said, voice thick with memory. "She was the only one could settle the wild ones. You just take your time." Clara smiled, blinking away the sting in her eyes. She thought about her mother's stories, the way she spoke about horses as if they were people, each with a heart full of secrets and hopes. She used to say the meanest horse was usually the one who needed love the most. Clara murmured, more to herself than anyone else. As the hours ticked by, the old stable came alive with quiet industry. Maybelle swept out the worst of the dust. Clara gathered the cleanest hay she could find and made a makeshift bed in Firestorm's stall. She even dug out the battered radio, setting it on the window ledge and tuning in to a crackling country station. By nightfall, Firestorm stood quietly in his stall, eyes half closed, flanks still twitching but no longer rigid with fear. Clara sat on the tack trunk nearby, humming to herself, legs dangling like a kid again. Maybelle joined her, both women sipping strong tea from chipped mugs, sharing the kind of silence that feels like an embrace. "Think you'll stay this time?" Maybelle asked quietly, not looking at her. Clara hesitated, then nodded. "I want to. I need to see if I can fix at least one thing my father broke." Maybelle reached over, squeezing Clara's hand with the strength of someone who'd seen too many people leave. "You don't have to do it alone." Outside, coyotes howled in the distance, but the world inside the stable was still. Firestorm shifted, his great head lowering until his nose touched the straw at Clara's feet. She grinned, then fished a peppermint from her pocket and offered it on her palm. After a long moment, the stallion accepted, crunching it slowly, eyes thoughtful. That first night, Clara didn't leave the barn. She made up a cot in the feed room, the air rich with the scent of horses and hay. She lay awake, listening to Firestorm's breathing, feeling her own heart match his rhythm. Tomorrow would bring more challenges. There would be skeptics, trouble, maybe even danger. But in that moment, under the soft creak of old beams and the hush of dusk, Clara felt hope begin to root in the dark places she'd left untended for so long. The next morning dawned clear and gold. Clara was up before sunrise, feeding Firestorm by hand, brushing tangles from his mane, singing old lullabies in a voice meant for both of them. Each day fell into a quiet pattern, caring, listening, mending. Firestorm watched her with wary eyes, but each evening he seemed a little less wild, a little more at ease. Word got around. Kids riding by on bikes would pause to peek at the crazy lady and her killer horse. Clara ignored the gossip, focused only on the small victories. Firestorm's trust growing, his wounds healing, her own heart softening as she told him stories of a mother he'd never know and a world that just might be worth trusting after all. The days passed, slow and gentle, filled with shared silences and steady routines. In the solitude of those quiet beginnings, Clara and Firestorm were not so alone anymore. Something was changing in Dry Creek, something the world hadn't seen in years, and it all started, Clara thought, with a single act of patience, a shared wound, and the stubborn hope that even the wildest spirits can learn to trust again. Dry Creek had always been a town that remembered. People remembered debts, betrayals, small kindnesses, and old wounds in equal measure. For Clara West, this was both a curse and a blessing. In the first quiet days after bringing Firestorm to the old stables, she noticed the way eyes lingered longer as she walked down Main Street, the way conversations stilled for half a second when she stepped into Turner's General Store or the post office. Some folks smiled politely, a few offered tight-lipped nods, but more than a handful stared with open suspicion. To them, she was the prodigal daughter, the one who left, the one whose daddy burned every bridge he ever built. But as word spread that Clara had done what no one else in Dry Creek could, tame Firestorm, if only a little, something in the town began to shift. It started small, like a whisper in a crowded room. On a cool Tuesday morning, just as the first leaves started turning gold, Sheriff Nolan paid her a visit. He pulled up in his battered cruiser, stepped out, and tipped his hat in the half-light. Clara was mucking out Firestorm's stall, her sleeves rolled and her hair pulled back, when Nolan's boots crunched on the gravel. "Morning, Clara." His voice was even but not unfriendly. Nolan was a man of few words, known for his fair mind and quiet authority, a rare combination in these parts. He looked at Firestorm, who was watching the sheriff with a wary but curious eye, and then at Clara, who straightened, dusting off her hands. "Morning, Sheriff," she replied, trying not to sound defensive. "He's doing better. Still has his moods, but we're working on it." Nolan nodded, eyeing the stallion's scars. "That's a dangerous animal. Bill's been in my office 3 times this week, making noise about safety, liability, town bylaws." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "You know what you're doing?" Clara met his gaze, steady as stone. "I do. I'm not looking for trouble, Sheriff. Just want a chance to do right by him. And by my mother's memory." Nolan looked at her a long moment, then shrugged. "All right. You got my number if anything goes sideways. Town could use a little good news, if you ask me." He tipped his hat again and walked back to his car. His show of support quiet but unmistakable. After that, small gestures began to appear. First from Maybelle, who had always stood by Clara's mother, then from a handful of others who remembered a different side of the West family. Old Tom Perkins, the retired farrier, stopped by one afternoon with a sack of sweet feed and a handful of stories about the days when Clara's mother used to win every barrel race for 50 miles. "That horse of yours has some fire, all right," Tom said. "But I've seen worse brought to heel with patience and a soft touch. Your mama had both." By the end of the week, someone had mended the broken latch on the stable gate. Another night, a fresh bale of hay was left at the door with no note. Even the sullen teenage boy from the feed store offered to help stack supplies, shrugging when Clara thanked him as if it were nothing. In small, quiet ways, Dry Creek was reaching out. Testing the waters, perhaps, but reaching all the same. Clara noticed the change most during her evening routine with Firestorm. She would brush him slowly, singing old songs, telling stories she remembered from her mother, about brave horses and gentle giants, about storms weathered and lost things found. Maybelle often sat nearby, mending tack or knitting quietly, adding her own memories in a gentle, running commentary. One evening, as Clara ran her fingers through Firestorm's mane, Maybelle recounted a tale of how Clara's mother once rescued a stray dog from the river, nursing it back to health despite everyone's protests. "She never could turn away from something broken," Maybelle said, smiling. "Guess that runs in the family." Clara found herself laughing, really laughing, for the first time in ages. The sound startled Firestorm, but he soon settled, sensing her lighter heart. "I wish she could see this," Clara whispered. "I wish I'd listened more, learned more from her." Maybelle squeezed her shoulder. "You're doing just fine, honey. She'd be proud, and so am I." As autumn deepened, a handful of children, emboldened by their parents' cautious curiosity, began to visit. At first they hovered near the fence, watching Clara work with Firestorm, asking shy questions about horses and scars and the meaning of bravery. Clara welcomed them, answering gently, sometimes letting them hand-feed carrots to Firestorm under her careful eye. One afternoon, a little girl named Rosie, who reminded Clara painfully of her younger self, lingered after the others left. "Does he still get scared?" Rosie asked, glancing nervously at Firestorm. "All the time," Clara admitted. "But every day, he's a little less afraid. Sometimes being brave just means trying again." Rosie nodded solemnly, then reached out to stroke Firestorm's neck. The stallion flinched, but allowed it, and Rosie's eyes went wide with delight. As the days slipped by, Clara realized that both she and Firestorm were changing. Each act of kindness, each shared story, each hesitant hand reaching out through fear, they all wove together into something bigger than the sum of their parts. The pain of the past was still there, but it was softer, blurred around the edges by the new memories being made. For the first time in years, Clara felt like she belonged, not just to Firestorm or to Maybelle, but to the stubborn, scarred, slowly healing heart of Dry Creek itself. One night, as the moon climbed high and the wind rustled through the cottonwoods, Clara sat in the old barn with Firestorm's head resting in her lap. She stroked his cheek, whispering thanks, not just to him, but to everyone who had offered her a chance to start again. "I think we might just make it, old boy," she said, her voice soft as hope. "Maybe this is home after all." Outside, the town slept, unaware that its own healing had already begun. The gentle rhythm of the days was short-lived. With Firestorm beginning to heal and the ranch feeling almost like home, Clara started to believe that maybe she and the stallion could both belong in Dry Creek again. But peace is a fragile thing in a place where history runs deep, and old wounds are never quite forgotten. It started with whispers. A neighbor caught Clara in the market, her voice low and eyes darting. "You know your father's not pleased," she warned. "Says you're putting folks in danger keeping that horse." Others began to avoid her on the street, or offered stiff, obligatory greetings before scurrying away. Clara tried to shrug it off, but the feeling of being watched grew thicker each day. Then, one morning, Bill Hendricks himself arrived at the old stables. He parked his big truck just outside the fence, the engine idling long after he stepped out, a show of power and ownership that made Clara's stomach clench. He was dressed sharp, boots polished, hat low over his eyes. It was the look of a man preparing for a fight. He didn't bother with pleasantries. "I want the horse back, Clara." "This..." He gestured broadly at the mended stalls and the children's drawings tacked up near Firestorm's door. "This little operation of yours is over." Clara kept her hands steady as she cleaned a bridle, refusing to look at him directly. "He's not yours anymore, Dad. He's mine. Sheriff Nolan made that clear." Bill's face hardened. "I'm not talking about the law. I'm talking about what's right. That animal is dangerous. You're going to get someone hurt. Maybe yourself." "You're not worried about me," Clara said quietly, her voice clipped. "You just want control, but you lost that a long time ago." Bill took a step closer, lowering his voice so Maybelle, who watched warily from the barn door, couldn't hear. "You're still just a little girl who doesn't understand the real world. People in this town remember, Clara. They remember what happened to your mother. They remember what happened to me. If you're smart, you'll walk away." Clara's jaw tightened. The pain in her father's voice almost made her flinch. Almost. But she wouldn't let him see that. Not now. "You made your choices," she said, barely above a whisper. "Let me make mine." With a huff, Bill stormed back to his truck. But Clara knew he wouldn't give up so easily. The rumors grew louder. Some people muttered about the cursed West Ranch, about how Clara was tempting fate. Others whispered about Firestorm's violent past, each retelling growing darker and less tethered to the truth. Even the children started to stay away, their parents calling them home early and warning them not to go near the stables. Maybelle tried to comfort Clara, offering tea and old family stories. But Clara couldn't shake the feeling of isolation creeping in around her. She poured herself into caring for Firestorm, determined to prove everyone wrong. Each day she worked longer, tending to the ranch, fixing up the barn, mending fences, and grooming the big stallion until his coat shone and his eyes seemed brighter. But worry lingered like a shadow. It was just after midnight when everything changed. Clara woke to the distant sound of glass breaking. At first she thought it was a dream, an echo from the past. Then she heard it again. Footsteps, angry whispers, and the terrified shriek of a horse in distress. She grabbed her flashlight and ran. The cold night air bit at her skin as she sprinted to the barn. Shadows flitted across the walls, 3 figures in hoodies and work boots, faces obscured. They were waving sticks and ropes, shouting at Firestorm, who reared and kicked in terror, eyes wild. "Get away from him!" Clara shouted, her voice raw with panic. The vandals hesitated, startled by her sudden appearance. One of them hurled a rock that missed her by inches. "Freak!" Another spat. "Take your monster and leave!" Clara stood her ground. "He's not a monster! You're the ones—" But they were already running, melting into the darkness. Firestorm, half mad with fear, broke free from his stall, smashing the latch and barreling past Clara. She tried to grab his halter, but he was too fast, his panic blinding. He thundered into the open night, hooves pounding the frozen earth, disappearing into the hills beyond the ranch. Clara dropped to her knees in the mud, breath ragged, tears stinging her cheeks. Maybelle rushed out in her robe, flashlight in hand. But it was too late. The barn was a mess. Straw scattered, buckets overturned, a window shattered. But worst of all, Firestorm was gone. For a long moment, the 2 women stood in the moonlit wreckage, listening to the echo of hoofbeats fading into the dark hills. Clara's heart twisted with guilt and helpless fury. "I failed him, Maybelle. I promised I'd keep him safe." Maybelle pulled her close, arms strong and steady. "No, honey, this isn't on you. People can be cruel when they're scared. But that horse knows you love him. He'll remember." Clara nodded, though the words barely reached her. In that moment, she felt the old ache of abandonment return, sharper than ever. But beneath it, another feeling grew, a stubborn determination, the kind her mother used to call grit. She stood, wiping tears from her face, and stared into the darkness where Firestorm had vanished. "I'm going to find him," she said, voice shaking but sure. "No matter what it takes. I'm not giving up on him." The night was cold, the world unfriendly, and the old wounds were wide open. But Clara West was done running. This time she would fight for the one soul who needed her most. And somewhere, out in the wild hills, Firestorm was waiting. Lost, afraid, but not alone. Not anymore. The moment Firestorm vanished into the darkness, Clara felt the emptiness inside her open up like a wound. She could hardly breathe. Every instinct screamed for her to chase after him. But she forced herself to think. The vandals were gone, cowards, running from what they'd done. But their damage remained. Shattered glass, twisted metal, and the raw fear left in their wake. Maybelle wrapped a blanket around Clara's shoulders as she sat in the barn's entryway, shaking. "You need to rest, honey," she urged gently, but Clara was already gathering her boots and coat, mind racing with worry. "I can't rest, Maybelle. He's out there, scared, hurt, maybe lost for good." "You're no good to him if you're half dead yourself," Maybelle argued, but she saw the determination in Clara's eyes and relented. "At least take this." She pressed a flask of coffee into Clara's hand, along with a battered first aid kit and her mother's old flashlight. Clara squeezed Maybelle's hand. "If I'm not back by dawn, call Nolan." Then she set out into the night, heart pounding and breath sharp in the cold air. Outside, the sky was heavy with clouds, the moon hidden, the hills painted in endless shades of shadow. Every sound seemed amplified: the crunch of gravel beneath her boots, the distant cry of an owl, the wind whispering through dry grass. She followed Firestorm's hoofprints, grateful for the soft ground and the faint light from her flashlight. But the tracks soon led her beyond the safety of the ranch. Clara pressed on, her mind haunted by memories of the past. Her mother leading her by the hand through these same hills, teaching her to read the signs left by deer and coyotes, telling stories about the wild horses that once roamed these lands. She clung to those lessons now, using every ounce of skill she had. It wasn't long before the clouds burst, releasing a cold, drenching rain that soaked her to the bone. Her flashlight flickered, threatening to die. Still, she refused to give up. She called Firestorm's name, her voice lost in the storm, then listened desperately for any reply. Each step felt heavier, her boots squelching in the mud. Hours passed. Clara's muscles ached. She tripped over roots and nearly tumbled down a ravine. The wind whipped her hair, stinging her cheeks. But she pushed on, refusing to surrender to exhaustion or fear. Somewhere in the darkness, she thought she heard a distant whinny. She stopped, heart leaping. Was it real, or just hope playing tricks? Clara listened hard, closing her eyes, letting her memory fill in the rest. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. If you ever get lost, stop and listen. Sometimes the world will show you the way. She pressed forward, guided now less by sight and more by instinct. She stumbled upon a patch of flattened grass, a place where a large animal had bedded down. Fresh manure, tangled brush, a hoofprint pressed deep into the earth. Clara's heart pounded. Firestorm had been here, maybe not long ago. She kept going. The storm eased, leaving a cold, dripping silence. The first faint blush of dawn began to lighten the sky. As she reached a narrow ravine, she saw a flash of chestnut in the gloom, a shape caught between two fallen logs, tangled and struggling. Firestorm! Clara dropped her kit and scrambled down the slope. The stallion was wedged in the ravine, mud-caked and shivering, eyes rolling in panic. He thrashed as she approached, but Clara crouched low, speaking in a soft, steady tone. It's okay. It's me. I'm here, boy. She inched closer. Hands open, voice trembling but gentle. You're hurt, but I'm not leaving. I promise. She began to hum, her mother's lullaby, broken and raw from the cold. The sound seemed to calm Firestorm, who stilled, sides heaving, watching her with wide, desperate eyes. Clara surveyed the situation. His front leg was trapped between two thick branches, but not broken. She moved slowly, using all her strength to free the limb, whispering encouragement all the while. It took time, more time than she thought she had. But finally, the log shifted and Firestorm staggered free, collapsing in the mud. Clara threw her arms around his neck, tears streaming down her cheeks. You're okay. You're okay. I've got you. For a moment, she let herself sob, feeling the full weight of fear and relief. Then, remembering the first aid kit, she cleaned Firestorm's cuts as best she could, murmuring apologies every time he flinched. The rain eased. In the quiet gray of dawn, Clara simply sat beside Firestorm, arm draped over his neck, both of them shivering and exhausted. She began to sing again, the same lullaby, letting it drift through the ravine. It was not a song of victory, but of survival, of hope carved from heartbreak. Time passed. Gradually, Firestorm's breathing slowed. He nuzzled Clara's shoulder, a gesture so small, so trusting, it nearly undid her. She smiled through tears. I'm not giving up on you. Not ever. She waited until he stood on his own, shaky but determined. When at last he was ready, Clara took off her jacket and laid it across his back. "Come on, boy. Let's go home." This time she didn't try to lead him by the halter. Instead, she walked beside him, step for step, letting him choose the pace. Every so often, Firestorm would nudge her arm, as if reassuring himself that she was real, that he was not alone. As they made their slow way back toward the ranch, Clara felt a new sense of connection. The bond between them had been forged not by force or fear, but by endurance and understanding. They had survived the wild night together, not as captor and captive, but as equals. By the time they reached the edge of her family's land, the sun had risen, gold and defiant against the battered sky. The air smelled of wet earth and second chances. Clara stopped, brushing the mud from Firestorm's mane, and looked back at the hills. "Thank you," she whispered, not just to the horse, but to her mother, to the wild country that had tested her, to the stubborn hope that had kept her moving through the dark. She and Firestorm walked the last mile in silence, their shadows long in the morning light. Each step was heavy, but also lighter than before, a promise that even the deepest wounds could heal, if only you refused to give up. And somewhere behind them, the wild night faded, giving way to the slow, steady dawn of a new beginning. By the time Clara and Firestorm reached the ranch's front gate, the sun was climbing over the hills, painting the world in defiant gold. Clara's boots were caked with mud, her hair a tangled mess, and her face was streaked with tears and sweat. Firestorm limped at her side, battered but unbroken, his chestnut coat still slick with the night's rain and streaked with mud. Each step was a statement. They had survived. The quiet of the early morning was shattered by angry voices. Clara stopped short. At the edge of the property, a small crowd had gathered. Neighbors, townsfolk, even children peering from behind their parents' legs. But at the center of the knot stood Bill Hendricks, arms folded across his chest, flanked by 2 ranch hands and a few of his most loyal supporters. Bill's eyes were cold as winter steel, but his jaw was set in stubborn pride. Sheriff Nolan's cruiser was parked nearby. The lawman stood between Bill and the gate, arms loose at his sides, his gaze flicking from Clara to her father and back again. Clara took a deep breath, her heart thundering. She didn't slow as she approached, Firestorm following close. The crowd parted slowly, a mixture of fascination and fear in their eyes. Even the skeptics fell silent, sensing something was about to happen. Bill stepped forward, his voice booming across the yard. "That's far enough. This ends here, Clara. You're endangering everyone. Yourself. This town. That horse. I won't let you bring more trouble to Dry Creek." Clara stopped just inside the gate, straightening her back despite the exhaustion and pain. She could feel Firestorm tense beside her, ready to bolt or defend her if needed. But she placed a steady hand on his neck, grounding them both. "I'm not the one bringing trouble, Dad," she replied, her voice surprisingly clear. "I'm not the one who sent men to break into my barn last night, or who's been spreading fear because he can't stand to lose control." Gasps and mutters rippled through the crowd. Bill flushed, anger and embarrassment mixing on his face. "Don't you blame me for your mistakes, Clara. I did what I had to do. That horse, he's a menace. He belongs with someone who can handle him, someone who understands what real responsibility means." Clara shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. Responsibility isn't about owning something so you can break it, Dad. It's about caring for it even when it's hard, even when it hurts. I know you're afraid. Afraid you'll never live down your mistakes. Afraid you'll lose whatever power you have left. But I'm not your enemy. Firestorm isn't either. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. Is there any proof to what you're saying, Clara? About last night? Clara nodded, lifting her sleeve to reveal a deep bruise from where one of the vandals had shoved her. Ask around, Sheriff. Plenty of folks saw strange trucks heading toward my property. The glass is still broken, the stall doors busted, and Firestorm was nearly killed. But I'm not here to point fingers. I'm here to stand up for what's right. Bill bristled, stepping forward. I won't let you shame me in front of this town. That horse is coming with me one way or another. Clara didn't back down. She met her father's gaze, unblinking. No, he's not. He's not yours to take. And neither am I. I'm done letting you make me feel small. Bill looked like he might explode. Fists clenched, face red. But before he could speak, Sheriff Nolan raised a hand. Enough. Everybody calm down. He stepped forward, taking in the whole scene. Clara and Firestorm standing shoulder to shoulder, the gathered townsfolk watching with anxious curiosity, Bill's men shifting uncomfortably at the edges. Nolan's voice carried authority and patience. Let's hear both sides before anyone does something they'll regret. Clara drew a shaky breath. I grew up believing I was broken because you said I was. I believed Firestorm was dangerous because you said he was, but he's not. He's just hurt, like me, like all of us. He deserves a chance to choose his own destiny. So do I. A hush settled. The crowd seemed to lean in. Bill opened his mouth, but for once no words came. Sheriff Nolan looked at Bill, then at Clara. This isn't just about a horse. This is about old wounds that haven't healed, about who we want to be as a town. I watched what you did, Clara. Most folks wouldn't have risked their lives for an animal everyone else gave up on. That counts for something. He paused, then turned to the crowd. Anyone here got a good reason why Clara shouldn't keep Firestorm? A few voices murmured, but no one spoke up. Even Bill's supporters were silent, unsure now in the face of Clara's courage. Sheriff Nolan nodded, then faced Bill. That horse stays with Clara. That's my ruling. If anyone has a problem, they can take it up with me. Bill's shoulders sagged, his anger replaced by something more defeated. Pain, maybe, or regret. For the first time, he looked old. He glared at Clara, then turned and pushed through the crowd, his men following. The crowd began to disperse, people murmuring to each other, some offering Clara awkward smiles, others simply nodding in respect. Clara let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Firestorm nudged her hand, and she leaned into him, whispering, "We did it." Sheriff Nolan came over, his face softer now. You did more than just keep a horse alive. You reminded this town what it means to stand up for something. Take care, Clara, and let me know if there's any more trouble. Clara nodded, gratitude swelling in her chest. As the sun rose higher and the morning warmed, she and Firestorm walked back up the drive together. The barn was still battered, the wounds of the night raw, but something had shifted. Clara wasn't alone anymore. The town had heard her. The past no longer held her captive. She led Firestorm through the open gate, both of them marked by scars, but each step forward was a victory. And as Dry Creek watched, some with pride, some with shame, they saw a new chapter begin. One written by courage, truth, and the unbreakable bond between a woman and her horse. The dust of confrontation settled slowly, But by midday, Dry Creek felt different, lighter somehow, as if a breath of fresh air had swept through the town. Clara lingered near Firestorm's stall, her fingers carding gently through his mane as he dozed, finally safe. The events of the past day clung to her, but beneath the exhaustion was a glimmer of hope she hadn't dared to feel for years. Word of the standoff at the ranch gate spread quickly, carried on the lips of gossipers and well-meaning neighbors alike. Some doubted that peace would last, but others, especially the children, saw something they couldn't forget. By the end of the week, the ranch that had once been a symbol of loss and scandal began to stir with new life. It started with small gestures. A bag of apples left at the barn door. A sack of oats set quietly beside the feed room. Fresh boards and a box of nails leaning against the broken fence, left by hands too proud to knock, but too kind to stay away. Clara found herself smiling at these quiet offerings, the way Dry Creek chose to show support without fanfare. It was the way her mother's friends had once done things. Practical, steady, rooted in action rather than words. Maybelle was the first to speak her mind. One afternoon, as Clara scrubbed troughs and Maybelle polished a leather saddle, the older woman said, "People want to help, honey. They just need to see it's worth it." She nodded toward the ranch yard, where a pair of local teens, kids who had once been wary of Firestorm, were raking up storm debris with awkward determination. Clara couldn't hide her gratitude. "I never thought anyone would come back after all that's happened." Maybelle grinned. "You stood up for what mattered. Folks respect that, even if they won't say it to your face." Word spread. Families brought their children to meet the infamous Firestorm, who, much to everyone's astonishment, had grown calm and gentle under Clara's care. No longer the wild, furious beast, he accepted treats from trembling hands, his dark eyes shining with quiet intelligence. His scars were fading, replaced by a healthy sheen on his chestnut coat and an unmistakable confidence in his step. The children adored him, and their laughter filled the barn. Inspired by the change, more townsfolk offered their help. Old Tom Perkins returned to shoe Firestorm and a pair of rescued mares. The Perkins twins, who ran the hardware store, fixed the broken stable roof, while a retired teacher donated storybooks and art supplies for visiting kids. Even the feed store's grumpy owner showed up one day, mumbling that he had extra alfalfa nobody else wanted, his cheeks ruddy as he quietly patted Firestorm's neck. Clara watched her ranch transform piece by piece. Where there had been emptiness, there was movement and purpose. Volunteers repaired stalls, painted fences, and hauled bales of hay. The ranch yard echoed with voices and laughter, some timid, some bold, all eager to be part of something good. In every corner, traces of Clara's mother lingered. A hand-painted sign reading, "Kindness grows here," faded but visible, and an old quilt hung in the tack room window. Firestorm became the heart of the new herd. Once feared, he now led the other horses, rescues and strays with battered bodies and wary spirits. He greeted each one with gentle nudges, guiding them to water, sharing his hay, and breaking up minor squabbles. The animals took their cues from him. When a young colt arrived, half-starved and wild-eyed, Firestorm stood close, patient and steady, until the newcomer settled beside him. It was Maybelle who noticed first. "He's not just healed, Clara. He's teaching the others how to heal too." Her voice was soft with pride as she watched Firestorm lead the herd to pasture at sunset, his head high and tail swishing in the golden light. Clara felt a peace she'd never known, a quiet certainty that the pain of the past didn't have to define the future. She threw herself into the work of caring for the ranch and the animals. Each day brought new faces and fresh challenges, but also laughter and moments of triumph. A little girl named Rosie, who had once been too afraid to approach Firestorm, now brushed his mane every afternoon, singing off-key but with fierce joy. Her parents volunteered to help build a new chicken coop, and others followed their example. Word spread beyond Dry Creek, too. Families from neighboring towns visited, drawn by tales of the once wild horse and the ranch that offered second chances. Some came to adopt animals, others simply to spend a quiet afternoon among gentle giants. Clara welcomed them all, sharing her story not as a tale of tragedy, but as proof that hope could survive even the harshest winters. At night, as Clara walked the quiet ranch yard beneath a blanket of stars, she found herself talking to her mother, telling her about the small victories, the children's laughter, the miracles unfolding in every stall. "We did it, Mom," she'd whisper, tears of relief and happiness slipping down her cheeks. "We made something beautiful from the broken pieces." Firestorm often joined her in these nighttime walks, his breath warm against her arm, his steps steady beside hers. Their bond was no longer forged by pain alone, but by shared trust, by days spent building a future neither of them could have imagined. The scars remained, but they were no longer the first thing people saw. As autumn deepened, Clara decided to open the ranch to local schools and families, calling it the Haven. She offered free riding lessons to children who needed a safe place and welcomed every stray or abandoned animal brought to her gate. She created a sanctuary, not just for animals, but for people too. In every face, she saw a little of herself and her mother, bruised by life, but hungry for kindness. By the time the leaves began to fall, the ranch was no longer just hers. It belonged to Dry Creek, to every lost soul who'd found a piece of home among the horses, and to every child who believed for the first time that even the wildest spirit could find peace. And at the heart of it all stood Firestorm, once a symbol of rage and fear, now a living testament to what patience, courage, and a little compassion could do. Under Clara's care, the ranch and the town both found their way back to hope. One sunrise, one helping hand, and one healed heart at a time. Autumn's golden days turned cooler and shorter, each sunset blazing across the Dry Creek sky like a benediction. The ranch pulsed with new life, a place once defined by emptiness, now bustling with laughter, the gentle sounds of horses, and the steady rhythm of chores. The pain that had lived in the shadows of the barn began to fade, replaced by something Clara hadn't dared to name before: belonging. One crisp evening, after the last of the visitors had gone and Firestorm stood content at the pasture fence, Clara found herself on the porch with Maybelle, sharing hot mugs of cider as dusk settled over the land. It was a rare, peaceful moment. For once, Clara felt no need to fill the silence. The past few months had been a whirlwind: anger, loss, hope, joy. And in the quiet, she finally felt strong enough to look back. Maybelle broke the silence first, her voice thoughtful. "You know, your mama would be proud. You've given this place a second life, and yourself, too." Clara smiled, the ache in her chest softer now. "I used to think healing meant pretending nothing ever happened, hiding the pain. But you can't outrun your past. You have to walk through it, scars and all." She looked out at Firestorm, who watched her with those deep, wise eyes. "He taught me that." Maybelle nodded. "Your mama always said, the only way out is through. Took me a long time to believe it." They sat together, wrapped in the gentle hush of early evening, and Clara felt the need to speak aloud the lessons she'd learned, hoping that saying them might help her hold on to them. "Healing's not a straight line," Clara began, more to herself than to Maybelle. "It's messy. Sometimes you think you're past the worst of it, and then something opens up the old wounds again. But you can't close yourself off forever. That's what I did for years, running from this town, from Dad, from my own reflection." Maybelle listened, her presence steady and warm. Clara's voice softened. "Forgiveness is just as hard. I thought it meant forgetting, letting people off the hook. But it's not. It's choosing not to let the pain control you anymore. Dad hurt me. Hurt a lot of people. I don't have to trust him, or even like him. But I don't want to keep carrying that bitterness." She remembered the day after the standoff at the gate, how Bill had stood at the edge of the crowd, his pride stripped away, his anger hollowed out by years of loss. For weeks after, he'd stayed away, licking his wounds and avoiding the ranch. Then, one gray afternoon, Clara found him standing by the fence, watching Firestorm graze. He looked older, smaller, almost lost. He didn't apologize, but his silence was a sort of truce. Clara didn't offer forgiveness outright. She simply stood beside him, not speaking, just sharing the same cold air. Sometimes, she realized, forgiveness wasn't about words at all. It was about letting go, about refusing to let the past write your whole story. As autumn deepened, Clara shared these insights with the people who came to the Haven. When frightened children or anxious parents asked about Firestorm's scars, she told the truth. He was hurt, but he learned to trust again. Not because he forgot, but because someone was patient with him. That's how we heal, together, slowly, with kindness. She saw it work, over and over. The nervous little girl who wouldn't speak above a whisper learned to ride bareback, giggling with her friends. The gruff old man who had sworn off horses after a bad fall now came every Sunday to help mend fences and tell tall tales to anyone who would listen. Even the townspeople who'd once doubted Clara began to trust her, coming for advice, for comfort, for a moment of peace among the horses. Clara realized, too, that true healing always ripples outward. Her willingness to face her own pain made space for others to do the same. People shared their stories of lost spouses, broken dreams, family feuds that had lasted decades. The ranch became a sanctuary not just for animals, but for all who needed a second chance. One evening, as the air turned sharp with the promise of winter, Clara and Maybelle walked through the pasture at dusk. Firestorm led the herd, his movements fluid and sure. Once, a sudden noise would have sent him into a panic. Now, he paused, glanced at Clara, and calmly resumed grazing. "He's changed," Maybelle remarked, pride in her voice. Clara smiled, her heart full. "We both have. I don't flinch every time something goes wrong anymore. I don't think every setback is the end of the world. I just keep moving forward." Maybelle wrapped an arm around Clara's shoulders. "That's all any of us can do." The lessons became part of every day at the ranch. Patience with every frightened animal. Grace for every mistake. Celebration of small victories. And forgiveness, most of all, for themselves, for each other, for those who'd caused hurt, whether or not they ever made it right. One Sunday afternoon, Clara gathered a group of children in the barn and shared her favorite story from her mother. "There was once a wild horse," she began, "who believed he'd never belong anywhere, that his scars made him broken, but someone saw his strength, his courage, and loved him anyway. That's what made him a leader. Not his perfection, but his willingness to try again. The children listened wide-eyed, and even the adults nearby were silent, taking in the truth of it. That night, Clara wrote in her journal, something she hadn't done in years. She filled the pages with gratitude for Firestorm, for Maybelle, for the kids and the neighbors, even for the struggles that brought her home. She realized she didn't regret any of it, not even the pain, because it had shaped her into the woman she'd become. Dry Creek changed, too. Old feuds cooled. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in years came together at the ranch for potlucks, barn dances, and workdays. Forgiveness bloomed in quiet ways. Over a shared cup of coffee, a repaired fence, a story told beneath the stars. Looking out over the ranch, Clara felt a peace deeper than any she'd known. Her scars, like firestorms, hadn't disappeared, but they no longer defined her. Instead, they were proof of survival, of the power of patience, trust, and the simple, stubborn belief that healing was possible. In the hush of night, as Firestorm stood watch over his herd and the town slept beyond the hills, Clara knew she and Dry Creek had both found something precious, a way forward, together, into a future written not by old wounds, but by hope. Months passed, and winter settled gently over Dry Creek. Snow dusted the ranch's rooftops and blanketed the pastures, softening every scar in the land. Clara often rose before sunrise, her breath pluming in the cold as she walked the grounds with Firestorm beside her, the two of them moving quietly through a world remade by patience and forgiveness. The haven, once a forgotten patch of earth at the edge of town, had grown into something none of its founders could have imagined. Fences were straight and strong. The barn was warm with golden light, and horses, old, young, broken, wild, found safety within its weathered walls. Firestorm led the herd with the calm dignity of a survivor, teaching every new arrival that fear could give way to trust. Children crowded the stables after school, some brushing ponies, others reading storybooks aloud to rescued mares. The laughter and life that filled the ranch became Dry Creek's greatest pride. Local schools arranged field trips. People from neighboring towns sent donations, curious about the legend that had sprung up around the outcast woman and her once unruly stallion. And every so often, in the quiet moments after chores were done, Clara would look around and marvel at how much could change in a single year. The annual Dry Creek Fair arrived with the first hints of spring, its banners bright against the lingering frost. It was tradition for the town's leaders and elders to speak on the main stage, offering words of encouragement, sharing the stories that bound the community together. That year, all eyes turned to Clara. She stood behind the old wooden podium, Firestorm visible just beyond the crowd, calm and sure as ever. She was nervous. Her hands trembled slightly, though her voice held steady. She glanced at the faces before her, neighbors who doubted her, children who now trusted her, even her father, standing alone at the edge of the audience, a quiet pride in his gaze. "Thank you," Clara began, the words simple but heavy with meaning. "When I came back to Dry Creek, I carried a lot of pain. I thought scars were something to hide. I thought forgiveness was something you gave away, not something you lived with. But I was wrong on both counts." She paused, letting the hush settle. "What I learned here with all of you and with Firestorm is that scars tell a story. Not just of what's hurt us, but of what we survived. They're reminders that we can keep going, that the worst things don't have to be the last things." Clara looked down at her own hands. at the tiny white lines earned by work and time. Firestorm came to me angry, afraid, hurt by people who didn't understand him. I was angry too. I didn't want to trust. But sometimes, healing means letting go of the past. Not to forget, but to make room for something new. It means standing up for what's right, even when your voice shakes. It means giving second chances, not just to others, but to yourself. She smiled, searching the crowd for familiar faces. This ranch is more than a patch of land. It's a place for all the lost and wounded things, animals and people, to come and find safety and a little peace. We built it together. Every fence mended, every animal saved, every argument forgiven, every meal shared. That's the real legacy. It's not just mine. It belongs to everyone who had the courage to believe that kindness could be stronger than fear. A soft murmur of agreement rippled through the audience. Children squeezed their parents' hands. Even the old-timers, once hardest to win over, nodded with approval. Clara continued, her voice stronger now. We all have a choice. We can let our wounds define us, keep us apart, or we can let them teach us to care for each other. I hope the Haven will always be a place where people learn that lesson, where second chances aren't just possible, but expected. She ended her speech with a story about her mother, who had believed that the wildest horses made the finest friends if you met them with patience and hope. Mom used to say, "Every animal is just waiting for someone to understand its story. People are the same." I think she was right. Thunderous applause greeted her as she left the stage. Clara's cheeks burned, but she felt lighter than she had in years. Bill approached her quietly, a gentle smile in his tired eyes. He didn't need to say anything. His presence, humble and sincere, was enough. The rift between them had healed, not perfectly, but enough to let love in again. Firestorm became a local legend. Children who once feared him now followed him everywhere, telling newcomers how he'd survived and grown gentle, how he'd helped their families see the value in patience and forgiveness. The town's older residents, remembering harder times, told their own stories about second chances and the power of never giving up. The spring brought more animals to the Haven, dogs and cats, even a lost lamb, and Clara welcomed them all. She trained a handful of new volunteers, including a young woman who'd driven from 3 towns away, hoping for her own fresh start. The ranch's impact grew far beyond its fences. People wrote letters from all over, inspired by what they'd heard. Reporters visited, eager to meet the famous Mustang and the woman who'd changed a town. But through all the attention and change, Clara kept her focus on the daily work, tending wounds, listening to stories, believing in each soul that found its way to her gate. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the world shimmered gold, Clara stood at the pasture fence. Firestorm grazed nearby, strong and content. She reached out, resting her hand on his warm neck. "We did it, old friend," she murmured. "We turned the past into something worth living for." Firestorm nickered softly, and Clara smiled, no longer burdened by regret, but filled with gratitude. The legend of Clara and Firestorm grew. But what mattered most to her was not the stories told by others. It was the quiet truth she carried inside, that hope can take root in the harshest ground, that scars can become the lines of a new story, and that with compassion and courage, anyone, no matter how broken, can find their way home. As darkness fell and the stars blinked on, the Haven glowed with the promise of new beginnings. Dry Creek was forever changed, not because of a miracle, but because one woman and one wild horse had the courage to start again, and to invite everyone to do the same.